call this workshop to order. Today, are we in compliance with freedom of information?
Yes, sir, we are.
No, you're not. You're not in compliance.
Will you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Alford?
Here.
Ms. Becker?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Ms. Bryson?
Here.
Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mayor Perry?
Here. Will you join me in standing and saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do you have the civility pledge that's up there?
Sure.
Okay. You'll just follow along. I pledge to build a stronger and more prosperous community by advocating for civil engagement, respecting others and their viewpoints, and finding solutions for the betterment of the city or town. Thank you. So we will jump right into appearance by citizens. I would like to remind our citizens that section 2-5-70 of the town's code limits each person to 3 minutes when addressing town council. At the end of the 3 minutes, you are asked to conclude your comments. Please maintain a decorum suitable for the meeting and refrain from using any profane, abusive, or obscene language. If you have any materials you'd like to give council, please give them to the town clerk after you are finished speaking. Do we have any individuals signed up for today?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ken Campbell is the first.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here and talk for my 3 minutes. I will try to get the important points through. My main first purpose to be here is to thank you all. I think the action that you've taken to purchase the 7.5 or 7.16 acres on Bryant Road is a fantastic move. I think it indicates the sincerity and the goal of council to really work on affordable workforce housing. So on behalf of myself and of several organizations throughout the community, including the Home Coalition, Low Country Community Partners, and the Coastal Community Development Corporation, a broad thank you to all of you. Let me talk a little bit about the Coastal Community Development Corporation. That has been established, 501c3 has been applied for, and the goal of that corporation is to assist the town and its residents in providing affordable workforce housing, maintaining and preserving existing long-term rentals. In doing that, we will include components that will include the equity buildup from people that will be in units that will be bought and provided by the CCDC. I think a very important component. Another very important component that needs to be kept in mind, we will not be providing 10 or 15% of the units for affordable workforce housing. It'll be 100%. AMIs will run from 50% all the way up to 150. And they will not be for short number of years. They're not going to be for 10 years. 99-year covenants will go on these units. So these are for the long-term good of the community. I think we're the only organization that has organized since your challenge back in November to create something that can really impact affordable workforce housing. Our goals are to assist the city, partner with the community, businesses in the community, the Low Country Foundation, and individuals to make this happen. The initial phase will be acquiring, renovating as necessary from existing housing inventory. The impact is now. It's not 3 years from now. I'm a developer. I understand that if I'm going to start a project, it's going to be 3 years before I deliver. We're going to be delivering. We've already delivered 1 unit. Got to take the first step up the mountain. That's been done, and we're going to deliver more units on a very steady basis. We talked about the partnership. The way we've programmed our units are to have 80% come from, hopefully I can get another 20 seconds in, 80% come from the private portion of the island and 20% coming from the town. So I think it meets most of your criteria. If you would consider this a formal request for
With all-
inclusion in this current year
With all
budget
due respect,
to support 12 units.
as we work
Thank you.
hard to maintain our 3 minutes in the decorum, I have to ask you, you stop.
I appreciate that, and amazing how quickly 3 minutes goes.
It does,
Thank
yes,
you all.
thank you.
Ken, you dropped your pen.
Next.
Kim Likens, Ms. Likens?
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to publicly today thank Council members Patsy Bryson and Steve Alford for supporting the Boys and Girls Club by volunteering to be ride leaders this past weekend at our Petal Hilton Head. We welcomed a record 725 riders on Sunday. And Saturday evening, we partnered with the Kiwanis to offer a grill and chill at the club where over 400 riders came to look at the programs that we offer. People left in awe of the facility and the amazing services, but they were equally disturbed to learn that we have more than 100 children on our wait list who desperately need access to these intervention programs for homework, STEM, and even just outdoor play right now. For us, like so many other businesses, the problem is directly related to the diminishing stock of affordable housing on our island. I am beyond grateful to you for one of your top priorities being workforce housing, and I applaud you for considering putting $3,350,000 in the 2024 budget to work towards your housing initiatives. I'm excited about the North Point project and the partnership that you have there and the land purchase off of Spanish Wells Road. These initiatives are moving in the right direction. However, they take time. And the children sitting on my wait list right now don't have time. They need our services now. So I and many other businesses need housing solutions that can pay off not only in the future, like you're planning, but immediately. The Coastal Community Development Corporation is requesting that the town provide an opportunity to work together with them to preserve local workforce housing by purchasing inventory and deed restricting these units according to AMIs. The CCDC is a local nonprofit dedicated to being part of the housing crisis solution, and it has the ability to immediately safeguard Hilton Head workforce housing. I'm asking you to please consider working with this nonprofit as your housing strategy. It meets so many of your supporting goals, including growth management. Also, it can make an impact now. Why is this so important? Our Early Childhood Center recently received the news that 2 of their classrooms will be closing this fall. That means 40 to 50 kindergartners are no longer living on Hilton Head Island. These families are gone, and more are going to be forced to go down that path. No longer having children in our community to serve is not the solution that I am looking for to solve my waitlist problem, and I know it's not the solution that you want me to have. Thank you in advance for working with the CCDC to make an impact on housing now.
Thank you. Next, Zendaya.
Certainly, Mr. Skip Hoagland. Mr. Hoagland?
Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. You're not in FOIA compliance, and we need a council transparency pledge as well. Town budgets and audits are fraudulent. No accounting on millions of overcharged hidden legal fees by dishonest CPA and town lawyers, millions of ATAX funds handed to the chamber, plus millions of hospitality funds disappeared. Green Fitty Auditor was hired by violators Orlando Gruber, who both caught committing illegal acts with CPA Troyer in tow. They call this a positive budget and independent audit. This could not be further from the truth. This is not an external independent financial audit. It's an internal audit hired by town insiders and paid with town tax funds to hide and cheat taxpayers. A budget audit only shows what insiders want us to see. Only a true independent external forensic audit shows the real numbers on how and where tax funds are illegally used and wasted. People are often confused about the difference between a financial statement audit prepared by insiders and a detailed external audit. The Green-Finney audit will not analyze every transaction or look for fraud specifically. I called Green-Finney and they agree with my assessment was correct. A forensic audit, on the other hand, is conducted by forensic audit experts specifically designed to uncover fraud, waste, illegal criminal use, and an issue of tax funds, which we already know and caught these town employees, Gruber, Orlando, and Coltrane doing. Mr. Orlando, do you and Troyer agree to forensic audit today? If not, why not, if you have nothing to hide? The fact is the entire town council has seen no accounting to identify the illegal and wasteful use, and will accomplish nothing with no accounting CPA knowledge. Let me help you with a statistic. Never in the history of the entire USA has a forensic audit been conducted on a town government, a chamber, a school district where wrongdoing, waste, and fraud was not discovered, and prison was a result most of the time. The AG and FBI needs to act on this town fraud. Now we end up with a part-time mayor who has stated that he's not for chamber transparency. Past Lennox schemed to hide a tax accounting for Bill Miles, the chamber, including help from lawyers Finger and Coltrane, who drafted the fraudulent DMO contract. Now Perry will do the same. Lawyers are also allowing the chamber to use tax funds for private purposes and profit. It's also illegal under South Carolina law. And the reason we sued the town for issuing $600,000 of CPONs for the dredging of Harbortown. We must stop this illegal tax use. You cannot use public monies that's not for the public good, reason, use, and benefit. And I think we've identified some other projects that y'all have been funding that's illegal as well. So yes, I'm looking real forward to analyzing this budget and looking at the forensic audits and having the audits done by audit the audit.
Mr. Hoagland?
Yes, sir. Last, I have Lynn Greeley. Ms. Greeley?
I'm here to make Lynn Greeley's speech, and I provide a power of attorney.
As you know, we do not accept that, and if you do speak, you will face the fine.
I look forward to that fine. Thank you very much. So there's two articles from the Island Packet. Hilton has the legal fees keep going up, so how much is too much? Hilton Head's outside legal fees outpace Charleston, Myrtle Beach, and you're paying for it. We have an invoice from the Columbia-based McNair Law Firm, which was hired by the town of Hilton Head regarding town manager Steve Riley's employment situation. Also, the Chamber of Bill Miles Law Firm as well. For now, there are no trained outside eyes looking to see whether the town of Hilton Head is properly spending hundreds of thousands of tax dollars annually on outside law firms. But better oversight is needed, says a Florida law professor and a longtime Charleston lawyer who has sued other lawyers for legal malpractice and benefit of other clients. This is coming. Since fiscal 2013, Hilton Head has paid a collective $2.4 million to 11 law firms, including more than $2 million to 3 present or former firms connected to the town's main outside attorney, Greg Alford, and Curtis Coltrane, his former law partner, according to town records provided to the Island Packet and Beaufort Gazette. Records show that for all but one of the last 5 fiscal years, the town increased its annual spending on outside legal firms from $331,000 to more than $778,000 last fiscal year. At the same time, the town was draining its reserves to recover from one of the worst hurricanes in decades. When compared to South Carolina's largest city, Charleston, and 2 similarly sized cities, Myrtle Beach and Spartanburg, Hilton had spent more on outside legal fees in recent fiscal years. The fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30. And the $2.3 million tab for Hilton Head taxpayers doesn't include the $113,000 annual salary for the town in-house staff lawyer. I'm shocked, said town council member Mark Grant, who told of the findings to the Island Packet and the Beaufort Gazette. I think we need to look at this. We need to be physically responsible with our tax money. You folks are representing taxpayers. You work for us. We don't work for you. You need to be better with what you're doing. So where is the millions in legal fees? The $7 million of ATAX funds, the $14 million hospitality taxes, $11 million used by the Chamber DMO, $600,000 issued to CPONs, 17 other private projects funded with tax funds. Where's the money you use to join the Chamber as members? We're all members if you use tax money, so we need to make Bill Miles show us everything under the Nonprofit Corporation Act law as well. There's so many federal and state laws being violated by you folks. I don't have time to list them all. You've got to clean up your act. You've got to look at the law and the facts and the truth. This is not about Skip Hoagland. This is about what I exposed.
Thank you.
Don't
Do you
condemn
have anybody
me.
else to speak?
No, sir, that concludes
Okay.
appearance by citizens.
With that being said, we
Here
will
are the two articles that I need
move
to submit.
into review and discussion of the proposed fiscal year 2024 consolidated budget, and I will turn it over to Mr. Mark Orlando.
Thank you, sir. Afternoon, everybody. Afternoon. Afternoon. Well, we're here at a workshop, and it's in, following up from the meeting we had at first reading. So what I have today is, for the most part, a very similar presentation with additional information. So, Mayor, I'll ask you what you, Town Council, prefer, if I would get through the entire presentation and go back for questions?
I would think that since it's as detailed as it is, if we would stop and address the questions as they come around, because if there are questions already, having the opportunity to speak may actually raise another question for clarification. I think it's best if we handle it as we go through.
Okay.
You all agree with that?
Fair enough.
Thank you.
So what I'll do is I'll get through this presentation, and there's obviously some slides that I'm going to go through a lot quicker than others, just for today's sake, knowing that we've already seen it. So, I would say overall, our budget as proposed to you, the FY24 consolidated budget, focuses on the Town Council strategic plan. In the next day or so, I will send you a draft strategic plan. I intend to have that on the agenda for the June 6th meeting for your consideration. Know that every element that has been prioritized by you coming out of that January workshop, strategic planning wise, is funded in this budget. So that could be staff time, it could be consulting dollars, it could be project-based as well. And so what you see on the screen up here is, at the very least, those top 15 priorities are budgeted. Growth management strategy, our workforce housing framework, our corridor and street enhancements, our William Hilton Parkway Gateway corridor, the startup of the Gullah Geechee Historic Neighborhoods Community Development Corp., a SWOT analysis, and an outcome of a plan as the end result, an island resilience plan. A very robust capital improvement program that we'll dive further into on Thursday. A land acquisition manual update, really a policy-based update, little cost except staff time, your time, but know that we're also strategically focusing on some acquisitions. SWOT analysis of our solid waste recycling program and that of the Beaufort County. Our DMO, the Destination Marketing Organization, a planning and measurement of performance. Short-term rental assessment and program implementation. Assessing revenue sources and funding opportunities. We had a little discussion about that. Know that a lot of that work will be for consideration and discussion item 12 through committee into Town Council after the budget. Complete the implementation of the Gullah Geechee Task Force Work Plan, assist with St. James Church mitigation and relocation, and of course, continue to improve our beach enhancements. Every year, I aim and we aim as a team to establish a lean operating budget and continue to refine, enhance our customer service, innovative solutions, employee engagement, to continue to invest in our community infrastructure so that we make an impact and it's place-based, and that all of our work through the budget is a catalyst to improve our awesome, amazing island. So we have 6 funds.
Mayor, sorry, stop. I just need to issue a public thank you. Thank you for putting the strategies and the budget connections up front. I think it's important for us all to recognize that we can't do those without the money behind them. So thank you for putting that up front.
Very welcome. We have 6 funds, the 4 funds from years prior: general fund, stormwater utility, capital projects, and debt service. And of course, the 2 new funds this year with our Gullah Geechee Historic Neighborhoods CDC, as well as our housing fund. I'll draw your attention with this little tool I have, the FY24 proposed budget for $129,950,293. You see that general fund is up approximately 9.3% or 9.3 million. Debt service down 1.9, cap projects down 5.6, stormwater utility arguably is flat, up 52,000. The new CDC fund, a $5.3 million fund, and the new housing fund, $3.35 million. The overall change of budget year over year, including those two new funds, is an 8.7% increase. I shared with you at first reading the various, excuse me, I gotta pull those notes out, the various sources of funds that show those different revenues. And you can see, again, I'll draw your attention to FY24 proposed budget. And the way we can look at this is year over year with a percent change, right? A dollar change and a percent change. Property taxes are up in revenue, 4.6%. Business license revenues up 17.2%. Local A-tax up 47.2%. Our EMS revenue, 15.2%. Permits and fees, 66.1%. And of course, along the side here, it's showing you what those tranches of funds are made up of. And so as an example, the permit and fee revenue is up. Short-term rental permit fees are in those, is in that account, I should say. Grants are up 77%. Of course, interest income is up. We've transferred in $54,547,000, and those transfers in, as I mentioned at first reading, hospitality tax, beach fees, TIF, state aid tax, real estate transfers fee, stormwater fee, road usage, electric franchise, and some capital. So it's phenomenal. Our budget without the transfers in is 73.8. With the transfers in, it's 129.
Mark, could I ask you a question about
Sure.
business license?
Yes.
17% growth is pretty significant. How much of that is associated with the new license requirements on short-term rentals?
Based upon our assessment, I believe very little. As we adopted and we changed, as we changed the rate structure in the codification of it, we knew there were winners and losers, right? Some paid more, some paid less, but with a revenue neutral analysis. What we're showing is in our receipts that businesses, there's more businesses, and the ones that are here are making more, right? As an
This is the
example.
growth of business in the community. Excellent, thank you.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we touched on that a little bit at F&A, and I'd asked as we move forward with the reporting of the performance of the budget, that we unpeel that a bit so that we have a better understanding as to where the growth actually is when it comes to the business license. We'd like to know who's doing well and
Right.
who may not be doing well. That was one. And also the grants, we're showing a substantial increase there. Some of that is because of the state money that's come down, but I've enjoyed the chart that is in the backup material that speaks to the grants that have been applied for and awarded and not awarded. I just ask that we take that step forward as we're moving forward with reporting out on the budget as well, that those requests of grant opportunities also tie back to our strategic plan somehow, okay? So we know
Right.
that which is the correct dollars.
We can add a column to that, not to get into the details, we'll add that. I see Josh taking 2 notes over there. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, sir. Transfers in, we don't have to dive into the details, but we can see hospitality tax revenue. So this is a revenue analysis. The hospitality taxes FY23 total is 13.492, and we can see that 5 million into general, 1.9 into debt, and 2.3 into CIP. And so for a total transfer in of $55.6 million, 11.3 to general, 11.9 to debt, and $29 million to CIP. Budget expenditures, in the same way I was looking at, we were looking at revenues, we'll look at those expenditures. Personnel and benefits up 17%, operating up 30%, transfers, what line is that, out 317%. And you can see, the rest are capital projects, debt service, land acquisition, housing, and stormwater funds. So that's the consolidated, and so that's just big picture budget, total revenues versus total expenditures. It's priority based. We have increased fund balances. We've mentioned that. Our projections at the beginning of the year, revenues are always less than actuals, and our spending is always less than budgeted. That has helped us increase fund balance. We are also more intentionally increasing fund balance, as one example this year, different than years past, by putting $1 million placed directly into a fund balance for land acquisition. One example. No change in property tax rate, knowing that we reduced millage last year for discussion, of course, in the workshop. 2 years of strong non-property tax rev collection are now being reflected in the budget. So we've been holding off. We've been holding John back a little bit with projecting those revenues, but it's time, and I showed that at first reading. It's time that we start realizing what 22 actuals are and what 23 trends are looking like, and start budgeting for that. Enhanced revenue through growth-related application fees and state ATAX funding to increase our general and capital funds. We're always trying to reduce line item expenditures. This year, less than last year. The year prior, a lot more than this past year. But I think that our department heads' commitment to being effective in their budget preparation is starting to pay dividends. The things that I believe that we didn't know we could afford from an operations standpoint, by cutting the budget, we're starting to see that we can in those areas that were not that important outward. There's funding in there for sewer connection and home repair programs through our ARPA funds. We talked about the 2 funds, and we're providing for housing and land acquisition, and we're not taking out of some of those other accounts to do that. We've asked for, and I've asked for, a significant number of people. We can see what I've asked for. I won't reiterate everything. Assistant Finance Director, as we're talking about implementing the budget, as we're talking about potential bonding, as we're actually just talking about better financial management. Mr. Troyer's asked me for a position for a couple years, and most years were no, but this year a funding source of property tax, business license up, and some short-term revenues coming in. Knowing that program is live and well, I brought that position forward at this time. Ditto with some of these other positions, and you can see that the funding source is on the right side of the column. Mostly, you can see if we just scroll through, you're seeing a little bit of property tax, but property tax is never by itself, right? It's not me coming in here telling you I need to use property taxes and we need more people. I truly would say I'm not the type of manager here for you to do that. What I realize though is the push and pull on a beach facilities tech, 2 of them on 12 miles of beach, knowing what we try to accomplish. But then we have beach fee, ATAX, short-term rental, business license, and some property tax. So I've used various funds to fund those positions. Some part-time folks as well, summer students, including high school students, beach ambassadors, and we have a commitment to put some of these young folks that are in our community to work here part-time, not just an internship because they need some hours from university, but I'd like to start trying to grow fire rescue facilities to have weekend jobs and summer jobs, not just a 3-month internship in between college courses. So that's a lot of those part-timers. Millage rate, we talked 23.10. That will, of course, change as we start diving into the county reassessment. We dropped millage in fiscal year '22 as we eliminated, and you can see here, natural disaster fund went away. The debt on that, the debt millage went away a fiscal year ago. Our mill value projected today is $985,000, up from last year. The effect on a Beaufort County property tax bill at a $500,000 versus $750,000 home value, you can see the red highlight on the page. And I would say that we're doing a lot with a little bit of property tax, our millage portion on the tax bill at least. And I say we should be proud of that. We really should. I think that we're using the dollars on our property tax collections as well as the transfers in and being creative in how we put those dollars together, and we should be proud of that. Reassessment is currently underway. We shared that with you at a recent workshop. John, our finance director, Josh, our deputy town manager, and a few others have been working with the county finance department, the assessor, the legal department, as well as the Department of Revenue up in up in Columbia. We need to calculate the effects of the reappraisal on all property values, and that the Department of Revenue will provide that guidance on the values and calculations. We're just not there yet to plug into this budget, unfortunately. The fiscal year '24 budget includes the property tax collections based on current values, not any changed values. That will come. We anticipate coming back to you with a budget ordinance amendment in July or August-ish to incorporate the reassessment property valuation. So know that we're working closely on that.
Can you explain a little bit about how that would work when you come forward?
Would be an amendment to the budget ordinance to, wrong button, to simply roll this back if that's what we are to do, right? So 23.1 as a mill rate would potentially change, and that's for your consideration through an ordinance, 2 readings.
And so that is a council decision when that comes forward? But
Yes,
it's
ma'am.
not baked into approving the budget.
No, ma'am, that is a council decision.
That is an effort to make revenue neutral so that while folks' property assessments may go up, as we know from the market in the last couple of years here, then the millage rate might come down to make the property tax amount as close to the same as possible. It's mathematically probably improbable. How's that, John? Mathematically probably improbable?
Probably improbable.
Yeah, my math 4 skills have long escaped me. To make it exactly, but the idea is to make the impact revenue neutral with regard to property taxes. And we can't yet know it until it happens.
And there's a lot of different algorithms that go into it basing off timing when it was purchased, who experiences those increases, what the maximum increase is to the property taxes. There's a lot of different variables that go into it that'll take better understanding at that point in time when we receive that information.
I'll get my math 4 book back out.
So is there a commitment by this council, Mayor, that when that's brought forward to us, that we will indeed make it a revenue neutral position and not utilize those funds for something else?
I would say that I'm all in favor for making it as revenue neutral as possible and not looking towards the whatever property increase that would come around later this year as additional revenue to the town.
We can't make a commitment based upon finances.
No.
Because we don't know what
We
the
don't have
circumstances
not
are
until
going
we
to be.
have the data.
The idea now is
Yep.
maintain a
Yeah.
level property tax.
I'm looking for confirmation that, as we're looking forward to July and those numbers come forward and we're in that position, that there won't be some other expenses that look like we should utilize that money for.
I don't think that during any of our conversations that we've had regarding the budget has talked about any potential additional revenue coming from property taxes increase. So the only thing that I can confirm right now is that when that does come around, it will be on the agenda for us to discuss as a council to make certain that we're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
That's Alex.
I'd caution us to making a commitment at this point, because the assessment will actually play a part into that decision, absolutely. But the current budget, take for consideration the topic that we'll be discussing on Thursday, which is the capital improvement projects. There's a lot of projects ahead of us, and in order to accomplish those projects, we're going to need funding. So I'd caution us as far as making a decision prematurely on the mill percentage.
And I'm going to come back, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't know if someone else was going to talk. All right. Good. Give me a chance to find something here. State aid tax. So we've been tracking this. It's not the first time you've seen it, not the first time the community's seen it. We see that we were somewhere around $6.1 million in 17 collection and about $13.8 million today. I wanted to be very specific on where those dollars are used, whether that's a DMO use, a CIP, debt, grants, town general fund, as well as grants to the community. So a little deeper dive into that, how are we putting this revenue growth of state aid tax to use in our budget, right? So we've put in this year's budget.
Sorry, can we go back to that chart? Yeah, on the previous page. I do have a couple of questions about that chart. The first thing, and I know Mr. Troyer knows I asked this question, and that is, this chart is based on calendar year. And the current budget, if someone looks at our current budget online, it's based on fiscal year. So when I compared the two, without seeing, there's a note on what we were provided about calendar year revenues, but it didn't line up with some of the other information. So if someone out there is trying to compare the current year budget, it's based on fiscal year, so the numbers don't line up. But these are actual numbers based on calendar year. So I wanted to make sure that we noted that.
This one happened to be done just to emphasize the grants, which are on a calendar year basis, but yes, our budget is fiscal year basis, so thank you.
Right. And the other thing that I want us to take a look at, and that is the DMO 30% that grew in 2018 and 2019 was around 2 million and 1.9 and change, 2.1 and change. 2020, we know that was the year that most hard hit by the pandemic, although residual effects still linger. But then it grew to 3.4, almost 3.5 million, and then 2022, and then the current calendar year is projected to be a little over 4.1 million. So there was a substantial growth in the 30% to DMO when you're comparing the pre-pandemic years to the after-pandemic years. And I think that's important for us to note about how much that 30% grew during that time period when we have our other discussions. And then if you compare that also to the DMO supplemental during those years, and then looking at the grants and then the town funding in those years. So I know we have some more discussions about the ATAX funding. And the other thing, and I'm just going to go through my list about ATAX, state ATAX questions now, is there's still pending legislation, Senator Thomas's bill S-284, which has been amended by House committee. I don't know where that stands, if they're talking about it today or not, but how might that impact this going forward into this next year, whether it's fiscal year or calendar year, and how might that impact the grants that are awarded during those years. So I know that's kind of a lot to throw out, but I think we need to be thinking about that as we look at these numbers and figure out what, if any, impact there's going to be from any legislation that might be adopted.
I think, just from what I've read, I think that answer is going to come out once it is finalized. And then as we meet as a council to determine how and if or will we utilize any of that 284. So there's a lot of questions about how it could benefit us or not at all. So I don't think that can be answered until said time as it's been approved and move forward.
And I apologize for throwing them all out at once, but I think as we look at this chart, it will help us going forward to remember to look for this page in our chart for where the numbers are right now.
I will dare say that this chart will probably become one of the most important charts that we will see in the coming years, because it will tell us exactly, well, of course it will tell us, but just like GovOS will indicate as to how rentals are going, what our revenues should be, I think we'll see this be the director as to how short-term rentals are addressed in the future.
So anyhow, stay tuned, don't forget this page.
But on that topic, if I can just interject something, on that topic, while it might be hypothetical right now, I think it is a realistic thought that we need to hold. If S-248 were to be approved and allow those funds to be utilized for other purposes, it no doubt will impact grants and supplementals and affiliated agencies. And if there was a desire to maintain those levels, that money's got to come from somewhere. And so it will impact our overall budget. And so when you start to think about those things in terms of how much we put out and how much we expect to do with the monies that come in, the burden should not, to balance it all out, be put on the taxpayers. And so while I appreciate the unbelievable amount that our town manager has made sure that our property taxes are not utilized to fund so much of what we enjoy here, the more we dip into those funds and the more there are thoughts that we are going to maintain the opportunities to disperse through grants and affiliated agencies, supplementals, et cetera, the more the burden will fall on property taxes. And therefore, there certainly has to be a serious conversation about that, given that property taxes for this community have been historically managed to appreciate that our community is largely retired and on something that we call fixed incomes and should not bear the burden in the long run. So I'm going to forever be continuing to push that aspect, that as we're looking at all of these funds, that we protect our property tax payments and our residents as the first consideration of all.
It is hypothetical as to what's
It
going to
is.
happen with 284, and that is a discussion that needs to be had with council at said time so that we can know what we're talking about and not dwell on hypotheticals that have no bearing at this point.
But I think the reason it becomes a point now is that when we were just discussing how property tax reduction, the millage rate reduction could happen or should happen or is anticipated to happen when the county starts to, has put their budget in place, and we're looking to neutralize that. And I've asked for a commitment that we will indeed do that, that source of income doesn't start being used to play into the hands of where there might be some repercussions if S-248 is approved.
That commitment can only come after we have the full information as to 284 and we meet as council and discuss. That's when that
I
commitment
understood, but
can't come
those are
out
the
now.
thoughts that have to be, I want to make sure that we all are aware that will impact our residents. And while it's a hypothetical, it very well needs to be included in the discussion with regard to this budget.
And what I'll say to town council, mayor, is, and council, one thing that we've done that I will say this, and we can convert this to fiscal year. I understand why John's looking at a calendar year, and the answer is the grants, right? The grants split up in half a year here and a half a year there. It skews it when we're trying to show those trends. What I pledge to do is listen. I see Josh taking notes, typing notes. Next year, or as we look at budget, when we look at budget, whatever the state law is, I will bring that forward, right? I always look at revenues. I look at potential sources. I look at your priorities as a collective council and how those funds can be distributed, right, to compound each other to accomplish your goals. And so That, since I've been here, 26, 23 months, not even, 25 months, 26 months, I've pledged that I will have those conversations with you and show you that. So that will come but right now in the budget, you'll see that $3 million is going to cap projects. We'll look at that. $3 million going to operations in our general fund. So this is how we're using it.
We'll do public comment after council's done.
You see that in general fund, right? As it's $3 million into, where am I? Right there, $3.4 million into general fund for things that are tourism related and affected. You'll see that general fund use of state aid tax funds only public safety, which is fire rescue, code enforcement, police, beach. We also use it for facilities, roadside maintenance. We've made some significant enhancements to our corridors, our pathways, our public parks, as well as our Office of Cultural Affairs. So, example, while it's not exactly into the Office of Cultural Affairs budget, the Christmas Christmas tree, the lighting ceremony that we participated and celebrated at Celebration Park is a use of ATAX. We also have put it into the capital projects and using it only for pathways, right? New pathways as well as maintenance and enhancements. You see, year over year, I was asked to provide this, kind of a different look than that. And so fiscal year 21 actuals, 22 actual, 23 estimate, 24 estimate, showing transfers to cap projects, transfers to general fund, 30 to DMO, some supplemental grants, and the community nonprofit grant applications and awards. So you'll see that ATAX in our general fund was carrying at about 1.3 and went to 1.6. Last year, 3.4, and this year, 3.5. Local ATAX, we also benefit from local accommodations taxes, and that's an amount of a little more than $7 million. You can see the bullet points of how those dollars are used. Pretty much identical to state ATAX. We've also looked at hospitality tax in the same way. And so the hospitality tax revenue, 5.8 in 21, 22, lower number. The estimates for 2023 are significant, 13.4. And again, these are transfers in, right? So, and then this year, 9.93 expenditures based upon the projected revenues. And you can see exactly where those dollars are used. They're used in general fund, capital projects, and debt service. And in general fund, you see top left corner, RBC Heritage Classic. It used to fund that, but we moved that to the affiliated agency account. Fire rescue ops, fire rescue equipment, our fire truck lease, the leases, I should say. Equipment, the fire trucks, parks, pathways, and debt service. And so that's only where H-tax is being used right now. Yes, sir. Well, Mayor.
Could you take some time and kind of explain, as you look at the revenues of the hospitality tax, you'll see a slight increase there from 21 to 22 to 23. But when you look at the local A-tax dollars, you see a bigger increase. And you would, your mind would associate the two as far as where they're coming from, which is mostly our visitors, should somewhat be the same in the increase. Can we explain that a bit?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that, yeah. We have held back our estimates on the local ATAX in the last couple of years just to make sure that those positive trends would realize. And so this year we're comfortable in going ahead and raising our estimates for the local. And then if Mark were to go back to that one. If you look at the difference, especially the transfer to capital projects, our whole capital plan is slightly less than last year, and especially in this one area. And so the use of the H-tax in the capital plan is a little bit less. And so the state, the H-tax is more about how much we use in the capital plan than what our estimate of the total collections are. And so it's not as clear as it could be, but there's a reason for the difference.
Footnote, just so that, everybody understands what we're talking about. Yep.
Okay. Josh, got that? All right. Short-term rental permit fee, we're estimating about 7,000 permits. Before the question is asked, I asked John Troyer, who April Aiken's doing a great job. She shared that there's 6,000 current permits. I said, well, John, are we closer to 6? He said, we're not at peak season yet. In a peak season, folks do convert their units into short-term rentals that don't currently have a permit. So we're still projecting approximately another 1,000 permits. We'll see. We have to get through a season. We have to measure it. We have to investigate it. But we're projecting 7,000 units at $250 a unit. And you can see that the short-term rental permit fee is used specifically and only for our third-party administration, public safety, which is our code enforcement, mostly a lot of our code enforcement team, fire inspections, community development, customer service, and we have staff ramped up, including part-timers that are practically full-timers, keeping up with the 6,000 permits. IT, finance support, facilities, and operations. And so the benefit here, too, is facilities and operations. If we need to make some improvements in areas that really serve, I don't want to look at it as an affected by, because I've been hearing that, but serve a short-term rental unit, then that's where those dollars are placed. First full year estimated cost $1.75 million.
Pause on that one. Thought just triggered there. We have to definitely appreciate that we're dealing with true projections here with no history. And that's complicated when you start to talk about budgeting. But I just challenge us as we're thinking about this. What if things take a turn and it's not 1.75 that we're bringing in, and all of the associated expenditures, for the most part, are probably not going to change. So we have made a commitment here, I think, for the long haul, as far as being in the business and having to support it. And the permanent fees may not always cover it after we get into this a bit.
Sir, you just explained what sometimes keeps me up at night, right? Because it's my job, truly it's my job to see what those trends look like. It's not as easy as just saying, well, the money's not coming in, the funds aren't coming in, let's shut down 4 projects, right? But it's always a balance of operations and projects. It's what we focus on, and if you'd like, we can continue to update Finance and Administrative Committee, short-term rental, how are we trending with revenues? Because we do watch that. If we're projecting 175 and we only have 6,004 permits at peak season, we're definitely going to ratchet back, and some of that ratcheting back has to be out of that account.
We've already got some 6,000
Yeah.
permits issued. We know that there are more to come in. And short of another pandemic, it's hard to expect our short-term rental market to shrink. We're trying to contain it.
But it would also, if you go back, I would also say that some of those spending categories, I don't know the connection directly to a short-term rental. And I wonder if some of the expenses on some of the other expenditures aren't dipping in here, so that if Alex were correct and we have a reduction in or a fluid number with that fund or that budget item, are we not putting ourselves in jeopardy? And I guess I relate it back to the increase of 14 new staff members, and how some of those are possibly actually being funded through this. So I would caution us as we're looking at that increase in the staff numbers.
Mark, let me ask you this question. Mid-year, we come around and look at a mid-year budget modification, whether it's a combination of, the new assessment, whether it's looking at this and we're at 1.4 million. Do we look at making cuts to make certain that we're not going over budget?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Tammy's point is well taken, that as a short-term rental owner, for the short-term rental owner, an explanation of the connections probably makes sense. So I think we ought to be prepared in writing to have that connection made.
Okay. Josh, you get that? Okay. When would you like to see that? Mid-year budget?
I think as soon as this budget is public, short-term rental owners are going to get.
Where are their dollars, how are their dollars being used?
Yeah, what's the connection to IT and finance, or
Right.
what's the connection to fire inspection?
Okay, we'll get that.
Does that have an answer?
Yes. Yes, sir. All right, getting into general fund or operating account, and you see the primary sources of revenue here are in the left column: property tax, local A tax, business license, and all the way down. You see franchise fees, permit fees, as well as the transfers in. And so our general fund budget, $57.98 million, that's our operating budget. Property taxes make up $16.9 million, local A tax 7, business license a total of 12.4, franchise fees $1 million, permit fees 3.7. And so some of the larger accounts here: public safety, EMS, beach preservation fee, H tax, state A tax, prior year funds, and those prior year funds will be used for those projects. As an example, district plans, LMO updates. Those funds are pledged, so to speak, and will transfer forward from last year simply because we either are under contract or will be under contract for that work. So,
Mark, I'm sorry, Mayor. When looking at this, I know that the Finance Administrative Committee receives reports from our finance officer, and also we do, on the current budget. But I think before second reading and the public hearing, it might be good to give the public information on where we stand on this year's budget, so that they know that we're okay and that the trends that we're looking at and forecasting for next year are comparable. So I think it'd be good for us to see a status report on the current year budget before we adopt this next year's budget.
okay. I will ask, remind me the date of the next F&A, Finance Administrative Committee meeting?
That one in May.
Pardon me? What? Pardon? Want a full report?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Jordan will give us a report, and maybe pleasantly surprised that there's some extra there. Hoping.
No, we're fine. We're doing well. I'm very comfortable with these, and so we'll finish fine this year. And since these numbers were originally put together, there's no reason to change those. And so we feel very comfortable about it all.
It'll be as of April 30, with those numbers. So as of April 30, so that leaves, May and June still for the year. So we have a pretty good prediction in 10 out of 12 months. So great.
Yeah,
Thanks. I think that'd be helpful.
It'll be a favorable report.
I'd just like to comment, if I may, Mayor, to give a compliment to our town manager and director of finance. We absolutely have been historically in good position with regard to how the town is situated financially. And that conservative approach served us well before and expected to continue that, so it continues to provide comfort to our residents here. Thank you for all the work that you do on that.
Thank you. So after 2 years, record high rev collections, and I've talked about a lot of this, so I'm going to skip through these slides just for time's sake, so we can look at some other funds. It's perusing through, there's nothing in here that I haven't mentioned already. New residential plan review fee equal to 50% of the permit fee was an add. Excuse me. We can see revenue trends for property taxes, local A-tax, business license, franchise fees, permits, and those permit fiscal year 24, far right, is inclusive of the short-term rental permit fee. EMS revs, investment, and other revs that are intergovernmental transfers, grants, beach services, miscellaneous. So I presented to you a balanced general fund budget, revenues matching expenditures, doing my very best to show you the revenue trends, the projected revenues that are conservative, and the intended expenditures, not just in fiscal year 24, but over time, so we have some comparison. I understand from you today that we will present to Finance Administrative Committee an update on the budget. Zendaya will add that to the agenda for F&A. Our general fund reserve policy, that was improved. It was a proposal that John Schroyer and I talked about and brought forward in year past. The lower limit increased, and you can see from 35 to 45 as a lower limit policy, as well as an upper limit from 40 to 55%. And you can see that the actual green line has been adjusted and is moved in between the ceiling and the upper and lower limit of our fund balance. You know, what that really means is that our fund balance, as it increased, we've increased our policy of savings, our fund balance policy, and didn't just automatically go to the fund balance to use it. We've increased the expectation in fund balance and wrapped the policy around it.
What that means in a bond rating?
Significant feedback from any bond rating agency. This policy decision, as well as our policy decision to once and for all have a futuristic, all-inclusive resilience plan, will go a long way with any bond rating agency. Right?
For those members of the public out there in Never Never Land, wherever you are, it's not a fund, F-U-N balance. It's a fund, as in a savings account.
I think I understood that.
It's not funny money, it's savings
Right,
account.
fund with a D. Proposed general fund budget expenditures, you see salaries, benefits, operating, public safety, affiliated agencies. We're transferring some general fund out to capital projects in years past, but we aren't doing that this year. We're transferring it to housing. Housing was in the CIP. We've created a new fund, as well as transferring land to land acquisition, an account $1 million. So you see a general fund total budget proposed, $57,980,977.
Mark, I think it's important to clarify that housing means workforce housing.
Yes, okay.
And,
Yes, sir.
So let's think about what we're calling that, because people could get confused and think it's referring to something broader in housing.
Without any objection, I will make the change at second and final reading to show a workforce housing fund. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, just since the topic is brought up, is it though just for workforce housing, or are these funds 100% directed towards workforce housing? I guess is my question. The reason I ask is, as you look baffled, like, why would you ask that question?
No, I didn't look
Because-
baffled. It's a good question.
But,
I suggest we talk a little deeper about that as we get into the housing fund.
I think we should. Thanks.
Suggestion? We talked about those positions, and so, you know, one is a marketing engagement director. We talked a lot about DMO, but there's different messages to get out there. And I think that position will pull together our ability to communicate effectively externally as well as internally. You see that one position in finance, several in fire rescue, and 4 in community development.
Mark, where do the code enforcement officers fall under in this budget? You've added some, and I would have thought they would have come from general fund.
Yes, sir. They're in general fund. They're funded by short-term rental and permit fees in general fund, as well as some others. I did not bring forward any new code enforcement officers.
We added those this current year.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Those 6 are in place. Bob's done a fabulous job recruiting and hiring those 6, and for now, he says he doesn't need anybody else.
Thank you for that clarification.
He needs to get through a season, and we'll ask him again. But I think that we hired the right folks. I know we hired the right folks in that regard. I was also asked a little bit about Office of Cultural Affairs, so sources of funds versus uses of funds. So the fiscal year 24 budget, $313,000. The sources of funds for that are state A-tax, local A-tax, and business licensing. Affiliated agency requests came in fiscal year 24. A proposed F&A, so a request of 2.8 million and a proposed out of finance and administrative committee straight into the budget of $2.363 million.
Sorry, Mayor and Manager, while we're on that slide, can you go back? Yes, thank you, the one. So Habitat for Humanity had requested a grant of $500,000, and I understand from the Finance Administrative Committee that it was thought to have a discussion about that related to the housing fund. Am I following the right path? Okay, so when we get to the housing fund, will we talk about it at that point, or is now the time to talk about it?
We couldn't talk about it at that point. I will share with you, yes, I've met with Habitat, with Brenda. We had a good conversation. I think that the details are post-budget, frankly. Those are policy decisions on how you use the funds and where you use those funds. I know that it did come out of F&A, and my understanding, I wasn't at the meeting that day, but I looked at, notes and whatnot staff shared with me, that let's get together and talk with them and see how we can help and see if there is a collective strategy to put in place, right? So that's what Ms. Dooley and I talked about. I by no means got very far with it. My head's been in the budget and strategic plan business for the last 30 days. So I do think that if you want me to pledge those funds, the work we need to do at post-budget on how to use those housing funds is an important to do.
So we'll put a footnote by that, talk about later. Okay, thank you.
And I'm not going to go through all of these. You can see them. This isn't the first time they've been up here, but Island Rec are affiliated agencies, and they're important to us as determined by F&A transferred funds through this. Island Rec, Coastal Discovery, Mitchellville, USCB, LRTA, Solicitor, 14th Circuit Solicitor, Beaufort County Economic Development Corporation, our Heritage, our BC Heritage Classic Foundation. Habitat for Humanity was not funded, and that's all of them. So out of our general fund, 2.6, 2.5 mils, or $2.8 million towards affiliated agencies.
Is the U.S., I'm sorry, Alex?
I was just making sure we were reading the right column.
Yeah, 2.3.
2.3.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you said 2.3.
That's all right.
And I was just going to ask if, of the USCB Event Management Ambassadors line, if that number is reflective of the change that was made with regard to, it's not. So that would be a lower total in the end, because that line item should be reduced, correct?
May I attempt to explain. So USCB Event Management, the USCB Ambassador Program came in and, prior year asked for 190, this year 238. That 238,985. That was based upon our town code that provided to them a certain percentage of ATAX. That number equated. It was what it was. So year prior, 190, 21, 110, and so as we saw that our ATAX revs went up, so did the USCB Ambassador automatic account. This year, because the ordinance is what it is, and F&A was reviewing the affiliated agencies, their request was $238,985. Their ask was, the recommendation out of Finance Administrative Committee was $238,985. So that won't go down in this fiscal year 24 budget, but my homework assignment is to bring back to Finance Administrative Committee as soon as we can. Josh and I have already met on it, to put together some sort of MOU similar to other affiliated agencies and bring forward to you for your consideration, first through committee, then through full council, somewhat of a term sheet, memorandum of agreement with USCB that isn't just an automatic amount, but it in fact has some goals, objectives, expectations, and measurement, along with some annual funding requests, just like everybody else.
So the work that F&A has been doing isn't reflected in this coming year's budget, but it will be a result from the following.
Yes. Sorry for the long answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
Expenditure highlights, for the most part, we've gone through this already. Some things that I didn't say, I'll highlight. We are overhauling our land management ordinance. That is a big lift. That will cost some external dollars. We are not equipped here to write code. It's not what we do every day. I don't advise that folks that work on day-to-day planning and development review related work and work as project managers write code. We have outsourced that. We will also have, at the end of the day, an island-wide master plan, a growth framework map, the conditions and trends / capacity study, several district plans that are intelligent planning tools. They're sub-area plans that should guide the land management ordinance and guide capital project investment as well as programming long-term. We will also establish, not update, a future land use map. We need one, as well as some other elements. We have increased some permitting and plan review. I'm looking at process improvements, but we've also added some fees to permitting and plan review. A little bit of it is the appropriate growth, paying for some of itself. We will continue to make plan review process improvements. Hats off to Missy, Chris Yates, Sean, and Michael, Trey, a whole bunch of others. But my expectations on that are high, so we will invest in our time as well as some software improvements. Software we already have, but improvements to it. We'll fund the town's 360/40-year celebration, also bring forward a music festival. We talked about that at strategic plan. We will put flock safety cameras and trail cameras up, align them with Beaufort County Sheriff's Office, and then calibrated salary adjustments so that we remain competitive. I've been working on that, trying to catch up and always trying to catch up with salaries to recruit and retain since I've got here, and then also before I arrived. So, yes, sir.
A couple things on that slide. The permitting plan review process, of course, we are projecting to have some increase in the collection of fees because we're introducing some new fees, okay? I'm just bringing this up for the wheels to turn as we move forward in our housing discussion. I think it's appropriate for us to talk about the fees maybe being abated for housing, because that could be the difference in someone saying that they're going to do a project and not, right? So.
Understood. Not to to try to not jump in those details, as we bring the land management ordinance forward, that is the place that we have that, I'd call it abatement incentive section on housing as one example, workforce housing. And Sean knows that.
So part of that in terms of, I know we're jumping ahead to housing, so actually I'm going to hold my question.
Any other questions on this page? Okay. We're prioritizing our marketing communications plan. At the end of the year, we will have an annual report. We'll continue to expand Christmas holiday lighting throughout the island. We'll continue with Crescendo, Lantern Parade, Earth Day, tree and menorah lighting. We're increased funding for park maintenance, road maintenance, landscape maintenance, corridor. As an example, there's funds to plant trees and understory in critical and important areas on our island in this budget, both from a facilities and improvement standpoint, as well as we build our new capital projects. We'll focus on beach operations. We've come a long way in a couple years, but I share that I believe we have a long way to go. And then we're, of course, transferring intentionally $1 million to a new land acquisition fund for us to use, whether we bond that, right? A 25-year bond could raise some significant dollars. We could compound that with the county fund, the green space fund, but it's there. Needless to say, our commitment to recruiting and retaining amazing employees, amazing teammates, with a good benefits package. I put in the budget a 4% performance-based salary increase, an increase in tuition reimbursement, a new wellness reimbursement, and then a continuation of work that this awesome, amazing organization has done before my time, but then also based upon some work that I've done since I've been here, right? Remember last year we increased 401k 1%. We have a vacation buyback option, 25 hours of vacation PTO buyback. We cover those South Carolina unfunded mandates in health insurance, retirement premiums. We have given $350 to $550 increase to Beaufort County Sheriff's officers that live on the island. I have done with Lisa Stauffer, there's Lisa, a town class and compensation study, a regional, we worked the phones regional, we did a big study, and we're always working the phones. We want our firefighters, as one example, to be the highest paid in the state at entry-level salaries. That's stuff you're not seeing in the 4%. I adjusted fire rescue compensation last year. We were losing too many folks. They would show up, they would work, they'd realize it costs a lot more to work here and live here, or at least travel to work here, than they first anticipated. We had to make that adjustment. That adjustment's made. But what it's doing is we're catching up this year, right? So this will be the full year that's in there. I've done some studies in the region, thanks to Lisa. Most organizations are giving 3 or 2% cost of living allowance, as well as 2 or 3% performance-based. So if you add up, example, our other municipalities in the region, I believe they're at 5% total. My proposal to you is 4%, but I know that I've adjusted some salaries. We recruited some good folks, and the proposal is I did hear some public comment on 5%, and I understand how hard it is and how important it is to retain folks. I also know that it's costly. Every time we go up 1%, 1% across the board based upon the employees we have here is close to $300,000. So.
Mark, I want to commend you for continuing to take a very close look at this, okay? We are a community that expects excellence, and you will not get excellence if you're not taking care of your people. Slide the public is not looking at here, but I am, shows the breakdown of the number of employees that actually live on Hilton Head that work for the town of Hilton Head, okay? And I gotta tell you that the number is not very high, okay? So the extra effort as far as retention is definitely important, and it's showing up and us having people here to do the work that we expect to be done. I'm not quite sure how we put a metric around the percentage of people that are living here, but the chart is absolutely important to support what you're doing.
I also wanted to just jump in on something. The Beaufort County Island resident stipend increase, that actually happened last year. That's not an additional increase. That's
Correct. Correct.
That, and I do want to commend the fact that our town staff is second to none. And they do an exceptional job and create the world-class community that we live in and we continue to strive to maintain. And I would also like to say that, in my humble opinion, there's no better job than working here in Hilton Head Island and under your leadership, Mark.
Mayor,
Yes.
if I might, as you all know, I value wellness, and I really appreciate the new wellness reimbursement. I think that's very important, and I hope that we'll have employees who'll take advantage of that. It's certainly something I support. And also, my families, as many families do, value education, so I'm glad to see the tuition reimbursement as well. You know, there are lots of different kind of benefits, but I wanted to point out those two in particular, so thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. And this is a little bit more what I said. January 22, a 3% salary increase. Late 22, fire rescue compensation adjustments. July 22, 3% merit, and the 4%. When you add it all up, it's about $3 million. And so what we have to keep paying attention to is providing the service that's expected. And for discussion at a workshop, 2 people on the beach. I look at it perhaps from a different lens. 2 folks on the beach, 5 hours a day, depending on the season, hot or cold, but they're chasing trash cans, they're helping EMS, they're helping shore beach services, they're helping and talking with Turtle Patrol. They're working with, as an example, the Westin on wedding permits. They're putting down beach mats. They're going to Home Depot to buy hammers and nails because they can change out boards on boardwalks easier, quicker, cheaper than they can bid that out and contract it out over the next 3-4 months. And yeah, 4% is important to them, but so is another person. And so that is one thing, as one example, I'm truly trying to balance in this time.
Mark, your beach ambassadors, or our beach ambassadors, have done an outstanding job. You continue to hear that from people. It's saving problems on the beach, and it's keeping people happy.
Absolutely.
It's a great program.
Great. Thank you, sir. Stormwater. All right. So stormwater, financial resources for stormwater-related expenditures, staffing, operations, inventory, modeling, master planning. You see the stormwater utility fees as the major source of revenue. $5.1 million. It's a $60,000 change from last year. We used a little bit of prior year funds. That's project-based. That doesn't transfer into people. Investment income and plan review fees. You'll see that plan review fees were 0 in years prior. The new fee schedule supports enforcement of that unfunded federal state water quality reg, the NPDES permit. We do spend a lot of time, and I do appreciate Sean and Brian and Jeff Netzinger, who put down their hours that it takes to review plans and issue permits and provide inspections. And so we calibrated it to cover their costs, not to have revenue excess, right, from a revenue neutral. Stormwater rate study is planned for '24, except we need the resilience plan done before we do that. There's no sense to study a rate study without the resilience plan. So perhaps the stormwater rate study moves forward into '25, the resilience plan needs to be first to the table. 2 new full-time employees are proposed, and the use of funds is stormwater utility fee, not any of those other fees we talked about, but a stormwater maintenance administrator and another stormwater inspector. Majority of the funds are routine maintenance, corrective maintenance, and capital projects. I was at a site visit today, taking a look at low water next to high ground causing issues, and we have a stormwater staff that literally were there ready to go, boots on, papers in hand, ready to solve problems. This program, I would say, is second to none. I know the team is working hard to bring forward, Scott Liggett's legacy, but they're also starting to build their own reputation and their own desire as well, helping residents. It's going to become really important as we adopt that resilience plan. It's a mindset more than it is a project. There's a lean operating budget, current rate structure. I'm trying to be with you very, very open in what we're working on. I wouldn't always say that was an easy thing to do. Stormwater folks just get out there and fix problems. Getting that pulled back a bit and organized so that we can move forward and fund the true need is happening daily, getting better at it. You'll see that our rate at $150, $150 per is the highest. I do know this firsthand, that $150 as the highest. We are doing so much more than other municipalities with those dollars. And that's a town council policy decision, and those funds are supporting it for now. We talked a little bit about cost coverage. I shared this with you at first reading. If you want me to slow down, I will. It's a little more detail. Annual current cost versus increase expectations and service, as well as an alignment or calibration of next year's cost and moving forward. You see the expenditures by category: salaries, benefits, 24%, operating 49%, inventory modeling, POA system, some corrective maintenance. While those numbers are going down, there's still hundreds of thousands of dollars in those accounts, including $1 million in routine maintenance and some contingency pump station maintenance. And then, of course, some transfer out to general fund for some salaries that, as an example, planning staff or other staff are working on stormwater related elements. We transfer out $125 into the general fund and then transfer out to CIP a little shy of $900,000. So for a total budget of 5.885, not much different from last year, 0.9% differential, $52,521 change.
I'm sorry, can you go back to that slide on expenditures? So I really appreciate what you're saying about the resiliency plan and the rate study. And I know the Public Planning Committee has on its agenda on this Thursday morning an RFQ, request for qualifications, for a consultant to help us with that. In the staff report, as I recall, that's to be funded partially by this budget, but also by a FEMA grant. And I was just wondering where within those expenditures by category would the funding be for the resiliency plan? I want to say it was $250,000 was the budget, but for the resiliency plan, but
$5,000, John. Is it in there?
just want to make sure it's in there somewhere.
It's in here.
Resiliency is in there.
Okay, all right. I want to ask for a particular line item at this point, but I just want to make that point that we are doing it and we're funding it and it's going to happen. Thank you.
Can you say a few more words about what a resiliency plan is?
Yes, Brian? Resilience plan? We haven't heard you talk at town council since you started here, Brian. Come on up. Or Jeff Netzinger. Brian McElwee.
You caught me off guard with that. Sorry, Brian McElwee, Assistant Community Development Director. So the resiliency plan will look at several different things. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from something, right? Not necessarily prevent something. So we're going to look at socioeconomics, stormwater, sea level rise, climate adaptation, a host of things. So we'll present that on Thursday at PPC. Does that help answer that?
Great job, I think.
Thank you.
And for more information, look at the staff report for Thursday's meeting. Does that help out?
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. So some of our service delivery, water quality, LMO compliance, MS4 permitting, inventory and modeling, routine maintenance, just, ditches, channels, street sweeping, pond management, pump station maintenance, and corrective maintenance. And I'll show you in a second, public systems versus private systems. Those private systems, there are agreements in place. And so you can see here the extent of service. The public system, we're maintaining only the town right-of-way, town easements, and town property. We are not maintaining state right-of-way, Beaufort County right-of-way, and unknown ownership on private property without an easement, without a right-of-way. There are 17 POA agreements and 6 current applicants. Those agreements are all brought to town council for you to agree. There's a model agreement in place. Jeff Buckaloo and Netzinger, Jeff Netzinger in the last long while has been really pushing to get those agreements in place. Those folks that need our help need to have an agreement in place for us to put easements in place to work on that, on those solutions. In FY24, the corrective maintenance project list, there are 23 projects. There could be 50, but I think after today, there might be 24 projects, Brian. We'll add a project potentially. But a lot of this work, all of this work is paid with stormwater utility funds and into our capital improvement program. 9 public systems, 14 POA systems, and the dollars, right? The projects and the dollars are aligned on the next slides. The corrective maintenance projects. There's 14 POA systems, and you can draw down through there. Some of it's just pipe cleaning. Other is repairing sinkholes. Others is inspection with cameras and repairs.
May I jump in and ask a question? So on the other slide, you mentioned these are the agreements that we have with the POAs and town-owned properties, but not county, not state. So what happens to those properties that are having difficulties where the trouble lies elsewhere?
We work with those agencies, right? We work with the state, we work with the county. One issue that we encountered today was, county assistance and an easement that the county owns and operates, where we will have the hard work will be this. As we really build our resilience plan, I think that there has to be a layer in the resilience plan. Water flows. It goes from point A to point B, and areas are flood prone, right? Some because of just Mother Nature, and others because there's ditches backed up. Others because there needs to be an engineered solution in place. That resilience plan needs to identify that. So as we start adding it all up, we have to take a look at where the state systems are, the county systems are, our systems are, and even private property outside of a gate, right? It's not just easy to say, well, you're behind a gate, that's a private system, bring forward. Some of it is permanent easements across properties to solve stormwater and water flow issues. And when we've done a great job here on the island of doing that in the past. The difficulty sometimes is the state might maintain it and inspect and maintain every 5 years, and our expectations might be a lot more frequent. And so I think through the work of our resilience plan, getting those partners at the table is going to be task number 1.
Well, there's one instance that comes to mind and why I asked the question. It is a county issue, but our town staff has worked really closely in trying to solve that problem. And I wonder long-term if there isn't a different solution whereby the town, and you know I'm not looking for more expenses, but certainly where the town owns more of what is here within the limits of Hilton Head Island, our roads, our sewers, et cetera, so that we can get out without having to negotiate with other county and state entities to solve a local problem. And I want to thank the staff that's been working closely to solve these problems.
Jeff Netzinger's back
Yeah, I know.
left corner there,
And
by
I
the way,
wanted to know
everybody.
that. Thank
If
you.
you have a stormwater problem, call him. He will put you on the list. And what we do need to do is through the resilience plan efforts, we will have community meetings and as well as you know of stormwater issues, bring them to my attention and we add them to our list and work to prioritize them. The resilience initiative, the resilience plan, approximately $400,000 cost, $75,000 from a grant. I could have just turned to this slide earlier. Sorry, Brian. And of course, as I mentioned, we've transferred out $860,000 into capital projects, and you see Gumtree Road improvements, Jarvis Creek outfall, Cordillo Court improvements, Moonshell Road ditch, it's in Folly Field, Wexford Pump Station, pump station security cameras, and the Lawton Pump Station.
Wanted to make this statement, more so for colleagues that are participating in this RFQ. High time for the direction here, okay? And I commend the town manager and staff for taking this on. If you really take a look at the amount of the stormwater that is being somewhat managed through agreements of POAs, and those POAs, I mean, in my mind, they've got constant monitoring of the situation. But outside of the POAs, and outside of the gated communities, otherwise, you don't necessarily have that monitoring going on, okay? And we can look at the spending history. Sure, you can make the argument that we've been equitable, but understanding the spots that are prone, the spots that have been neglected, and that sort of thing, we just have not had this level of detail as to where the problems are and where we need to move forward, which in the end may push us to doing something different with the rate. And I think just as we go through the qualification process, that point of it, I think, is so influential to everybody understanding why it's so important and then supporting whatever it is, if it's through new employees, new plan, whatever the case may be, why we're going in that direction. We're island, right? And as much as we talk about managing growth, you don't always have the pleasure of managing Mother Nature, okay? This is very important. It's not a huge portion of our budget, but it's a very critical portion of our budget.
And can I just say, because we're talking about all of this, those eyes and those properties, those situations that we were just talking about where the town doesn't have ownership. I would like to, I know, Mark, you and I talk about this because I bring it up a lot. But I would like to say to the council, to our mayor, that if we can spend some time investigating and having the discussion of what it does entail to own what's inside of our town limits so that we can address everyone's needs inside, outside the gate in every community. Thank you.
Thank you. These two new FTEs, a full-time employee, so these two new teammates to Jeff Netzinger and company, stormwater maintenance administrator, stormwater inspector. So we do know that we've got to get better at it. We're just not throwing people at it. The resilience plan will be that basic solution as well as the solutions for our future. put this in the slide because I wanted to start seeing myself, and I was asked this a couple different times, by ward. I didn't know how else to break the island up. We can break it up different ways. But how we've spent dollars in 18 all the way to 22 with a 5-year total. I do know that as we look at stormwater utility expenditures by ward, the intent there is to start taking a look at some of these major projects. And I know that Brian McElwee and Jeff Netzinger managed by Watershed and Sub-Area Watershed. And I think that a workshop is in our future on how we're prioritizing these projects and really trying to understand if those 24 on the page are the right 24 or are we missing something, so.
Trust you on that, Mark, but I couldn't read that chart.
Lynn, you're getting a lot of it, man.
It's a great chart, sir.
That chart I don't think is in our book. May we get a copy of that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Zendaya, will you make sure you send this, and John Schroyer has it, or Kim, actually. Kim, will you make sure you send this chart to all of town council? It's in here. Well, we'll get that to you, Zendaya. We have a PDF of it.
Thank you.
I think it'd be good for the Public Planning Committee to see that as part of the resiliency discussion.
It will be. This is some of our early work in that regard. So debt service, moving along, our debt service, 17.397. Property taxes, 31% of the debt service budget. Beach preservation fees, 25%. Hospitality, TIF, and real estate transfer fee, 11, 22, and 9.2% respectively.
The important thing to notice there is that our debt service expenditures are down by $2 million thanks to paying off debt.
Yes, they are.
Good job, John.
Good job, John, and town council in this community. You'll see that principal paid in 22 at 15.6, 23 at 16, and this year at 12.9, for a total of 17.397, down 10% from last year. We've also put in there some funding as you anticipate and consider new debt, right? And so this is something that you have talked about out loud and gave me some direction on as I've started to look into at strategic planning. And I intend to bring forward at least some options for us, for you, for us, after the budget is adopted. We placed $1.5 million in there just for consideration.
There was a slide back a ways where there was a 1,500%, I believe it was decrease in our interest payments overall. Is that correct? I should have asked you.
It was a 1,500% increase.
Increase, but not in
interest income.
in interest income.
Yes.
Right.
Highly unusual based on the current circumstances.
But that's the way that it's been over the past 12 months.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
We also had a decrease in our debt servicing costs. Can you refresh my memory? I know I should have asked when.
Yeah, no, the largest decrease is the decrease that was funded by the 5 mills for the natural disaster bonds.
Right.
Those 5 mills aren't there, and so those bond payments aren't there.
And there was, we've also reduced the expense to us of some of our other debt by renegotiation and having paid off. That's the percentage, and I know it's in here, and I passed by it, but I just wanted to point that out, and I'll go back and review it for the next.
Well, I think we should talk about that because I don't want to read between the lines. I think you're asking the question of we're paying less debt.
Right.
So can debt millage decrease? So we reduced millage. I'm not putting words, but I want to chat about this.
No, we've
because-
talked about it, so I think you have a heads
Right.
up.
We've reduced millage, 5 mills, when the emergency planning, emergency fund millage was reduced. It feels longer than a year-ish ago, but that's when it occurred. It affected last year, this current year's fiscal budget. There's no room to reduce millage here because those are just principal and interest payments paid over time, that it's just a natural recurring payment of debt, right? So it's not that we paid $16 million of debt last year, principal, and in this year only 12.9 projected, so there's some millage available. John, we talked about that today. You want to add to that? Right, because we talked a lot about revenues at property tax revenues, but total revenues at 17.3.
Right, and I think you can look at property taxes only support 31% of our debt payments, and so 69% of our debt payments are funded for specifically the special revenue bonds, and so that's your beach fees, your hospitality fees, and your TIF bonds. And so those payments will continue.
Right, and so as property tax affects debt, fiscal year 22, 5.6, last year 5.4, this year 5.4. There's no millage in there to reduce. We're using these other funds to transfer in and pay that debt.
You have the slide available that shows the various funds, the GO bonds, the revenue special obligation bonds. You have that slide available. There it is, just like that. And the interesting thing also to see, hence the source of funds for payment of the debts. But look at the final payment, FY. Several of them are in 2024 and 2025. So that's going to be very helpful to look at the placeholder, the 1.5 million placeholder, in case we wanted to look at debt service, is included in the budget for FY24.
Yes, ma'am.
And the refunding has been when we could find lower interest rates. So we continue to look for that occasion if it happens in the future, but future is a key word.
This is online. This is just a great summary of fiscal year 24 interest, principal, total payments on our various sources of debt, right? So total general obligation bonds payment this year of 6.4, balance after this year 46 million. Revenue, the special obligation bonds, and you can see what they're for: HTAX, USCB, beach preservation, and you can see a grand total existing this year, I should say, principal interest 15.8 with a remaining after those payments 75. And the same exercise there with the stormwater special obligation bonds for various projects.
While you're mentioning the stormwater bonds, with the resiliency plan, the rate study, and looking at paying down one of the stormwater bonds by 2026, there is a possibility that without a substantial rate increase, we could bond out the funds to do what is needed by the resiliency plan.
Yes. And in my time here, I've been focused on bringing to town council and ultimately the community solutions on where we're using our funds and how we're prioritizing the projects through our strategic plan. And so, for me, I'm looking at this knowing a little bit in our future that while we pay this debt off, and as we put a resilience plan in place, and while we have an engineer opinion of probable cost on some of those solutions, the immediate and future solutions, as one example, stormwater, that it's my responsibility with John to take a look at our various revenue sources and align them with those priorities for expenditures. So exercise for the future.
That was a lot of great information. Thank you for taking the time to explain it. That page is important, and I do appreciate your answer.
Thank you. My pleasure. 24 debt fund highlights. I don't think there's anything on there I haven't said except that this is going to be the year that we issue the lease for the fire trucks. We will have an entire new fleet of trucks. In the past, they were in the shop more than they weren't, and the shop is not on the island, not even just off the island. Gullah Geechee Historic Neighborhoods Community Development Corporation Fund, a nonprofit development corporation set up by town council last year, accounts for the costs associated with all actions of the corporation. I mentioned that you've placed the board. That board inaugural first meeting is in a week or so. Forgive me for not knowing the date. It's coming up. And then the primary sources of the CDC are state and county grants. We're very appreciative of the hard and great work that Senator Davis and his colleagues in South Carolina up in Columbia helped us with, the $5 million South Carolina grant. So Senator Davis probably isn't listening to me talk right now, but a big thank you to him for this, as well as to Mr. Greenway at the county for another $343,000. That Beaufort County grant was from the same American Rescue Plan funds that we benefited from. We believe we received $5.1 or $5.2 million for that. And the county also gave their municipal partners some funds. We pledged that towards overhead in year one and beyond, and then leaving that South Carolina grant in place for that corporation to work closely to start understanding where to make investments. There are no dollars other than grants, one from South Carolina, one from really the federal government. It's COVID stimulus dollars passed through to the state, passed through the county, passed over to the town for that. The accounts up here are placeholders. As we asked for those $5 million, we needed to show to a degree what they could be used for. I put that budget together, submitted to the state, full disclosure, here it is. I know that the corporation board, a future exec director, myself included, will refine this over time.
So it's important, as you mentioned, those are placeholders, so all those funds might not be spent, hopefully will not be spent that quickly, but maybe over some time. Hopefully for good results as soon as possible, but well done.
Right, and I'm not going to get out in front of the town council members that are on the board or the new board. They haven't even been in place yet, but I'm very much looking forward to meeting with them to talk about a few things. One, an executive director. Two, I'd say a year 1 to 3 strategic plan. What are their goals and objectives? And 3, how to align the funds that are in place towards that. And we're just starting interviews. I'd say we'll start the phone call interviews over the next couple weeks for the exec director. Housing fund, last fund to talk about today. And so the revenues for this housing fund are from a few different sources. One is a transfer from general fund, $2 million. A transfer from capital projects. In last year, or this current fiscal year's account, there were funds in there for North Point, the American Rescue Plan funds, $1 million. And then also transfer from capital projects. In this year's capital project account, those dollars were really miscellaneous dollars for use in various policy areas and incentive areas that you still did not really determine. But they were placeholders. They were placeholders to put last year in an account so that we could get on with North Point, place those American Rescue Plan dollars in there. We knew that we had $350,000 in fund balance. We pledged it into the CAP program. And this year, because we're growing it, last year, November 1st, Town Council adopted Finding Home, a housing plan that had some very specific goals and objectives in it. To implement it costs some dollars. North Point will cost some dollars. And instead of leaving some in general fund operating, some in capital, this year I brought forward an accounting of all funds, and in all funds, with the exception of staff time, right? So Missy's time, my time, any of our time isn't in this fund. But you'll see that budget expenditures, $1 million is earmarked for North Point, which we intend to award the RFP in very early June. I would award it today, but I haven't met finally with the North Point Housing Committee, and I haven't met with you to finalize that yet. We're ready. Ben's ready. Yes, sir.
Regarding the $350,000, is that the same money that several years ago was from?
It's the same.
Trying to let him finish his question. But we knew what you were asking.
I'll elaborate on that just for the
Yeah,
public.
that's important.
No, it's a secret.
I apologize for answering too soon. Yeah, there was a lawsuit settlement, and town council set that money aside. And so here's.
Experian, was that the one? Expedia, I mean, yeah.
Expedia, yeah, it was an Expedia lawsuit. Town council set that aside for future housing initiatives. Correct? Okay. And
I want to make a comment. I applaud us as a community in supporting having a housing fund set aside so we can measure against. But I would just encourage us to get our calculators out and take a look at this amount of money against the entire budget and how critical housing is to our community at the moment, okay?
And if I can just jump on that as well. Over the course of time, we had a number of different steps with regard to housing that were part of our plan. And one of them was to incentivize and to encourage private investment. And it's my impression that that focus of the private investment in and of itself to do the conversions of our dilapidated, some of the redevelopment perhaps that Mayor you spoke about, has fallen to the side and not been part of the priority with regard to solving the issues surrounding employment and housing on the island. And so before, when I said I'll hold my question for housing, I think one of them was fees initiatives for housing. And I'm hoping that as we're looking at those, we can reignite, because we can reignite the private conversation of encouraging those who are out there to come onto our island and create something that does not involve the public sector's involvement to the extent that North Point has been. So I'd like to see that aspect brought back into the conversation and emphasized strongly, and outreach done in whatever that takes, because for many people, that's the solution, preferred solution to workforce housing.
If I might add to the conversation, I think that we heard about a private endeavor today through the new nonprofit that Mr. Campbell mentioned. Certainly is a way for us to look at and to applaud and to look forward to more of their work in the community. In addition, the council just approved, as there was a press release, the purchase of the property on Bryant Road, looking at possible partnerships there in the future. And so I think there are a number of different places that we're looking. The middle line there, well, I guess it's the second line down, housing initiatives to be identified, gives us some flexibility to discuss as a council how to use those funds in many different ways, including public-private partnerships. So that's part of the discussion. And that's part of the discussion that I mentioned before when we were looking at affiliated agencies under the general fund and the request by Habitat for $500,000 to assist with their property acquisition for their model. So there are a number of different possibilities to look at with regard to those funds. We haven't yet identified them, hence the phrase "to be identified." So I think it's important for us to continue the discussion and to keep that in the forefront of what we do with this housing fund, workforce housing fund, and with other initiatives in our community.
I think two things, Betsy, on that I just want to comment is that part of my point to my statement is that I'd like to see a re-energized effort on the private sector and not a reliance on necessarily private-public or public, period. And one last point was that with the purchase of the property on Bryant Road, I think that some may have gotten ahead of themselves with regard to the purpose of that property. It may very well be ultimately decided that it is best suited for habitat or other workforce initiatives, but there was no decision or state vote or anything else that came out of executive session declaring that. And I think that impression was taken a little bit, maybe a step ahead of itself. And I, from my perspective, want to clarify that.
I'm just
David,
reading
you-
from the press release.
David, you have a
Yes,
comment?
well,
Yeah, I might characterize the private sector being stymied more in terms of the reality, the pragmatic gap between the cost of doing business on the side and developing a project and what affordable rents can amortize. So I think that truly was just, I mean, we had LMO amendments that were supposed to incentivize private investors and so on. And I think we learned that that simply wasn't going to work on this island with high costs of land, high cost of construction, lack of workers, and so on and so forth. There is a role for the public sector to solve the housing problem on Hilton Head Island.
Alex?
Before the rest of the council starts chiming in, we spend this 3.3. I just want to, that was the point I was trying to make, okay? Is that if we're serious about solving the issue, this is simply a placeholder for the moment.
Right.
There's going to be a series of strategies that have to come in play for us to get to the end result. And there has to be amount of a funding to go with it to make it happen.
Any other comments on that? So I will say that this is more than has ever been done in our community. It is in its infancy, it's in its learning stages, and I don't disagree at all. I agree that there needs to be a public group that also comes in and helps out with housing, or a private group, I'm sorry, not just a public-private partnership. You know, there is another one that's being discussed right now that is conversion of an existing building from 8 units to 10 units, hopefully. So that's going to be coming through council or through town staff, previous bank. So there is some of that, but we've talked about it, but we haven't pushed it. So I agree that we need to be a little bit more advocate for that a little bit more. So, any other discussion on this before we go to general comments?
yes, may I?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So as you know, one of my comments has been, or continuing comments, is with regard to finding funds in our budget that can be used to relieve our residents in property taxes, period. We have a situation, and I promised that I would identify areas within the budget, and I'll continue to do so. Mark and I have had some conversations, and I appreciate those. But one in particular that I'm going to talk about just briefly is we continue to set aside money for, as we have in 21, 22, 23, for the sheriff's department. And while we're doing that, our residents who pay their property tax bills know that they are also being charged by the county a fee. So in essence, we're being charged twice. And while I understand that we are still in litigation, and that's soon hopefully to be resolved, and there'll be an outcome one way or the other, if at some point the question has to be asked, how does that money get back to the residents who have paid now twice for the same services? And I would like to suggest here that upon resolution and further discussion, that we clearly identify that those monies being held are sent back, whether via refund in a check or through millage reduction overall. Certainly for this coming year, since it's still in here, you could do that. And with 2 mills, and with 2 million, that would be equivalent to 2 mills, roughly. So it is a point that really does need to be brought up, and I feel that budget conversation is the place to bring it up. We cannot continue to double tax, and the county should be aware that they're participating in that. And so that is on the table for us to discuss and resolve to the residents' benefit.
One thing that I would say the one thing I would say right now is that we're hypothetical as to what's going to happen with the lawsuit. So, it's not about taking those millage off now, because if we lose that lawsuit, then that money goes. So again, it's the hypothetical, what happens? And I don't know if we have enough directive, not only from within, but also from the county, as to how that really works, if there was to be a refund back to those owners that paid that tax rate, and what the cost of that would be. The cost to administer that fund could eat up the fund, but or close to it. But I'm just saying that we don't have that information to really begin to make a decision on that and how to move forward.
That's why it's a conversation that I'd like to begin, because if in fact that lawsuit is to be soon resolved, the matter of having paid a fee for the last several years and been taxed by the town for the last several years are in conflict. You cannot do that. You just cannot double tax. And so someone's going to owe somebody some money one way or the other. And the conversation needs to be being discussed now. And with budget and knowing that we're talking about monies and how they get used, I want to at least open that can and begin that conversation.
Steve?
I agree that we need to have a conversation. There's an awful lot that's unknown right now in terms of how that lawsuit will come out and how, to me, the principal question that we need to focus on in terms of the community is the service, police services to the island appropriate for this town? And historically, they have not been. And the question is, can the sheriff's department provide the level of service that we are entitled to, or do we have to do it in some other fashion, such as the town beginning to get into the business of providing police services? It isn't quite the time to discuss that yet because of the lawsuit and the question of how funds are going to be resolved, but it is quite likely that we may want to consider using the funds that have been set aside to begin to think about having our own police department.
And then just one other issue that to put out there, our budget, because our CIP doesn't currently, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, through Parks and Rec or any of address the development of pickleball courts and at the expectation of our community. And as we all know from our last meeting, which is just the latest of dozens of meetings, that we have listened to as a priority, an emphasis, a desire, and the opportunities that it holds for our community once we have that in place. And I'd like to ask for the council's commitment to changing what we need to within our projects to make sure that pickleball is done in this calendar year, and it's funded with monies somewhere in here. So, again, on the table, and
Well, pickleball, as I'll tackle that one. There's $250,000 in the old Schoolhouse Road Park, the Adriana Lane land. Remember some time ago, Mr. Greenway and I had a great conversation, and we talked about trading land. No cost, we valued it. It was land under the Cross Island for their potential ferry embarkation. It was in exchange for Old Schoolhouse Road and Barker Field. We own the water side at Barker, the extension as we call it. We do not maintain and control and whatnot the other side of the street on Barker. That's held up. There's a DOT encroachment permit that's needed. There's probably every week or so I bug Josh and ask what the status is. Josh keeps telling me pretty soon. When, Josh? Seriously. No, but sincerely, when?
We're actually trying to identify a closing date for some time within the next 30 to 45 days.
Right. And so when we close, we can take our dollars and invest them on our new property, and that would be the tennis/pickleball courts at Old Schoolhouse. There's $250,000 allocated in CIP fiscal year 24. We can dive into those details Thursday. So the folks that asked, those dollars are in there. There's also some dollars in Chaplin Park. And so as we were bringing forward Chaplin Park in months past, leading up to the last workshop, we were anticipating pickleball, a good complex, a significant investment at Chaplin Park. We had some other questions that came up at workshop. We know that we owe you some time with you. As soon as budget's adopted, we'll come back to the drawing board, the workshop table, to take a look at Chaplin Park and potentially another solution for pickleball, tennis, rackets, and some park improvements. Thursday, we can dive into all of that. We can dive into the scope, a little bit of the schedule, and some of your expectations, because Thursday's workshop is about cap projects and where you want those dollars prioritized this year. We'll share with you our thoughts. We'll share with you where Planning Commission prioritized based upon South Carolina planning enabling legislation, and we'll talk to you where those dollars are allocated in 24 and beyond.
We also have workshops planned for June for Chaplin and the other parks to also discuss it as well.
Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure those dollars are represented in this.
Message heard.
Yes, Glenn.
On a lighter, excuse me, go ahead, Glenn.
I think you asked for general comments. In summary, the presentation of the budget is outstanding. It's the most detailed I've seen in my terms of service here on the council. I can't recite it all back, but I think I do understand it. Most importantly, the creation of the two new funds clarifies the use and application of funds to projects that council has given a priority to. And so that is especially helpful. And the greatest focus of that obviously goes on workforce housing, and we're making significant goals, significant progress in that regard. So thank you for that detailed report.
Thank you, Glenn. Steve?
Going back to the comment on pickleball, which I'm all in favor of as a regular pickleball player, on a somewhat lighter side, those who read the Island Packet may have noticed in page 33 in the second session, at least electronically, is a very fascinating article on pickleball and all the things that are wrong with it. It is very funny, and I commend it to you for a little relief from this serious business.
Thank you, Steve. Any other general, Alex?
Yeah, just a few things. We heard from Mr. Campbell on the CCDC is what I wrote down. I can't remember what that stands for, but I'd ask that if we could get some more information as a council on that, that would be helpful on that initiative. My memory tells me that we also approve the holiday calendar along with the budget. I'm assuming that will be the same process this year. And I couldn't find it in here unless there's any I overlooked it, but.
It's in the draft ordinance, maybe?
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
getting nervous for a second.
That's
That
all
should
right.
be in the draft ordinance in your staff. Look at John, like, I did it, look.
The salary comparison for the town council where we are proposing movement there, the comparison of the town council on Hilton Head is based on fiscal year 2021. And I'm just wondering if it makes more sense for us to update that so that it's more current, because you got members on that listing that have not been on council for a long time. So that comparison, if we can clean that a little bit, I think that'll help, okay?
Which page are you?
I'm on page 54.
On the budget book?
Town council salary comparison. Yeah, the upper portion talks about other municipalities, the bottom portion lists out the activity for Hilton Head council members, okay? But it's based on fiscal 2021. I think we can go to 22 or 23 and get.
We're happy to update, yes.
Sure, okay. And the only other thing that I have is as mentioned before, we will be taking a look at where we are currently with, sometime between then and the actual closing of fiscal 23. But the potential of an overage there, I think is something that we also need to be thinking about, okay? So.
Right, and we will, as we bring that Finance Administrative Committee update to you soon, we're going to project, right, the current up to end of month, but then project the next 2 months. We are projecting and trending for underspending our budget and our revenues also, right, as I said a couple of times now, our revenues are coming in more than projected, and our spending is coming in less than budget. And we'll put together an analysis of that and project the last 60 days as well for you. I believe that's what you're asking for. Yes, sir.
I'm also looking for action once we close out the fiscal versus action now. Because it could be amendment of the budget that we are adopting, absolutely, right? So, yep.
David?
Yeah, I'm always impressed at how 7 people can look at the same information and come up with different perspectives on it. Mine has to do with what I consider to be a very significant excellence that we are making in this budget. If you think about the work that has been done on our road edges and our traffic circles and the palm trees that have been planted at the Cross Island Expressway and down Palmetto Bay Road, you just get the sense that all that deferred maintenance that has been accumulating over the past several decades is now changing. I think that's significant. Secondly, I think that the budget shows that we are serious about investing in those core values of this community, commitment to the environment, arts, history, culture, and so on. And you look at what we're doing at Mitchellville, what we're doing at the Coastal Discovery Museum, and so on, the rec center. Those are things that I think communicate to both our residents and also our visitors something that's important. We're rejuvenating this community in a way that sends a very strong message of optimism, again, to our residents and to our visitors. And I think that's incredibly important message for us, for this community, for this council, for this staff to get out. And then lastly, it's a commitment to excellence in that we are investing in our parks, in our beaches, and things that maybe don't distinguish us in terms of core values with other communities, but we're going to do it better. We are going to be known for our parks. We're going to be known for our experiences. So in those 3 levels, the cleaning up, the investing in core values, and just investing in excellence, I think really speaks to me in this budget. And that's my message. Mayor, thank you.
Yep, so I would actually add our plan to that, and the 1,700 to 2,000 voices that were put into that. What we're seeing today is a direct result of that and the excellence that's coming around that we're trying to get to. And with the extra staff that you're bringing in is to handle the services that are already in existence, not to create additional oversight, but to make certain that what we're trying to do works well and it provides the service back. I think we can all talk about the building permits that took 3 months to be issued, 4 months to be issued in the past. Now is much quicker than that. We get a report weekly. So as we talk about excellence, it takes a staff to do that. And I look at the budget compared from last year to this year, there really is no increase, real increase, because you've got $5.3 million, which are grants. You've got another $1.3 million, which is coming in from a previous time. So we're upping $2 million. We are adding staff, but we're not increasing, the budget to cover that. So I see us going in a great direction, and I agree with a lot of things that have been said here today. So yes, Patsy.
Thanks for that summary, and I'm glad the summary sheet is back up again as a forecast for Thursday. I'm looking forward to a discussion about the capital budget, but particularly would note the Capital Projects Fund, there's a reduction for the fiscal year, but I know we're going to talk about again, it's a multi-year. We haven't set aside that money, it's just we're putting it out over several years, so I want us to pay attention to that. And in addition, in the highlights for the capital fund that were provided to us, is one that we're particularly interested in at our January workshop, and that is safety improvements along the William Hilton Parkway corridor. And I highlighted that is prioritized in the capital budget. So I think it'd be helpful to really pinpoint how that will be done, because a lot of us are concerned about safety along that corridor and everywhere else on the island. So thank you for that. I'm certainly supportive of this budget, and I really appreciate, as the mayor said, the increases from outside sources, and we're doing more with what we have.
So with that, if there are no other comments, I will open it up to the public. Public comments. Yes, sir, Mr. Campbell, come on up.
I think I'm going to go someplace to be examined after this meeting, because I am freaking excited. I mean, honestly, I've never been through a budget meeting at the town. Congratulations to the town manager and staff. I think kept me awake. It was excellent. I understood a good, reasonable portion of it.
That was my goal.
But what really has me excited, is that back in November, council was unanimous in passing $1 million to go into the pot, passing a plan. Council, as I read it, unanimous today. Housing is important. It has to be public and private. I respect that it has to be private, and I respect that it must be public. And I'm going to be so happy to go back and report to the organizations that I'm a part of that, hey, calm down. Everybody's excited. They're looking for action. Action is happening. This council is very serious about it, and it's wonderful. And I will say what CCDC, Coastal Community Development Corporation, 501c3, the picture we've put together based upon the input that we've had through the town and its plans is about a 20% portion coming from the public, from the town, and 80% private. So private has to be there, and has to be there in a big way, and we're planning to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes, Mr. Hoagland.
Your honest service is appreciated. A legal chamber in town and a tax-funded DMO is greatly appreciated. Where's all the invoices and matching receipts for the following? Millions in illegal fees, taxes, including all those that were criminally used by lawyer Greg Alford to fund lawsuits against a citizen. $7 million in aid tax fees, unaccounted for, illegally used by Bill Miles in the chamber. $14 million in hospitality taxes, disappeared and unaccounted for. 11.5 million used by the chamber and the DMO illegally. No accounting, no audits, a fraudulent chamber contract drafted by lawyers Greg Alford, Curtis Coltrane, and Terry Finger in Bluffton. $600,000 of tax funds issued to Seapines for dredging of Harbortown that was illegal and in violation of South Carolina constitutional laws. You can't use public funds for private purpose, and you can't use them for profit like the criminally operated chamber is now doing. Hurricane and supplemental funding in the millions handed to Bill Miles and the chamber with zero accounting. All because of this illegal funding to Bill Miles, who said the tax use is his secret sauce. Nobody's on this council's business, including all the taxpayers. We need to see all this accounting more than ever. Please note, because the budget is illegal, allowing funding to the chamber and other illegal nonprofits like the Low Country Golf Owners Association, also tied to the chamber and Bill Miles, and $1 million taken to Canada, Mark Orlando's home country. This council and chamber also is causing the violations of many state and federal laws that's caused by all this illegal funding. How much illegal funding has been handed to Bill Miles for the town to join the chamber as a town member? What made this legal? Who is a member? Just the town council to go to the chamber ball in quid pro quo? Is it not a fact that all taxpayers are chamber members since tax funds were used? I think it's mandatory we have an outside forensic audit and a full FOIA compliance, or you ask the FBI to help you to follow the money because they're trained at accounting. Orlando, CPA Troyer, town lawyers, and Chamber Bill Miles must be investigated. Our town is in a real legal and transparency crisis. I'm so sorry to report that, but you need to come to that reality. I'm standing up here telling you the truth and the facts and the laws, and you're ignoring them for political reasons. I don't know what reason, but at some point you're going to have to live by your fiduciary responsibility. You're going to have to come to this reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland. Any other public comment? Yes, Shadan. On through.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council, and thank you, Manager. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Since I only have 3 minutes, so I'm just going to ask questions instead of waiting for your answers. I hope all these questions will be raised by Town Council members in the future. The first one is in terms of total budget. I agree with Mayor. It's not a significant increase over 2023. However, it is close to 70% over 2021 and 30% over 2022. So my question is, how much is because of the sugar high after the rescue package, and how much in the budget you budget as a growth of sustainable business? So that's question number one. Question number two is in terms of ATAX uses and sources. I would hope that you would publish that on the website so we can get a better look at in terms of the use and sources. But I have a question related to that slide. That's why I raised my hand, because my understanding, the statutory requirement for state ATAX money is 2%, and then you indicating on your slide it's a state ATAX of 3%. So that's probably a typo, but I just want to clarify that.
2% state and 1%
and 1% local, but your subtitle says state ATAX money. So that's what I want to clarify. And also want to clarify math. In terms of local, it's 1%, so that's around 7 million. But total is 13%. I just want to make sure I understand the math. I assume that you only capture 65% of the 2% of the state aid tax. That's why you got 13 million. That's question number two. And then question number three is that based on the uses and sources of H and A taxes, seems like in years you run a surplus and years you run a deficit. So I'm just curious, how do you fund those deficits in certain years when the A-tax is not available to cover all the expenditures? And then the third question I have, and this is really to council members, I think those are the real questions you should drill into. As a resident, I was just reflecting on Councilman Ames' comment about excellence. I've been here for 7 years. The town is definitely different, especially relating to traffic. That's not something I look for as something that's excellent, because that's not the lifestyle that we sign up for. So, and then in terms of the workforce housing, we really, really need to address the question, what is the need? In 2018, the town council has a paper saying that we need 5,000 or almost 6,000 units. So my question is, what are the available land? Is that 125 acres? How many units can be converted to residential buildings from the commercial buildings? And what is the labor participation rates on Hilton Head Island? And what is a competitive wage between Hilton Head and Bluffton and Savannah and Jasper? And most importantly, you actually offered a great example of how to solve the housing and retain employment, which is you use benefits to retain your good employees. So if the taxpayer can, or the town council, town government can use that, why we don't apply the same model to the private sector? Thank you.
Thank you. If you would get those questions to us in writing.
Statistics, and
Okay.
share with you all.
Okay, that'd be fine.
Great. I was going to ask
Any other
that.
questions? Comments? Seeing no other comments? Seeing no other comments, Mr. Orlando, great job.
Thank you,
We're
sir.
adjourned.
Thank you.